Hey, Jeannie.
Yeah, Brew.
Who's our guest on the Nerd Show today?
Today we're here with Steve Long. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hey, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you having me here. I would like to talk about renewable energy siting and permitting in Massachusetts. I've been with the Nature Conservancy for about 20 years. We like solving difficult problems, bringing our science to the table and our policy experience to the table. And we all know we need more renewable energy. We need to reduce demand. And we also need carbon, forest carbon, to help us absorb those emissions that we won't reduce with electrification and decarbonization. So that's the area in which we play. We try to thread that needle.
We like trees. We like clean energy. We
do.
Like solving the climate problems.
We like critters and biodiversity and affordability. That is such an important issue as well. Yeah.
So when you say carbon in the forests, are we talking about leaving our forests where they are? Are we talking about planting new trees? Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that.
We're talking about the carbon that's already stored in forests and the ability of trees to absorb more carbon in the future.
Okay.
So I heard your episode with Bill Muma, and he articulated it so clearly that it's really about thinking about those older trees that absorb more carbon than newer trees.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So where are we, and who are the players, and how are you dealing with them?
Absolutely. So there's been a 3-year process. The governor appointed a commission. I served on that commission. The commission made recommendations. Those recommendations became law. And for the past year and a half, the agencies have been promulgating regulations and developing guidance to help enable this process. And it's kind of a dual siting process, one for small scale, which is 25 megawatts and below for solar. And that will be done at the local scale in a consolidated permit. So rather than having each department in a town have a separate permit, the town has a year to come up with a permit. But before that year, there's a pre-filing process where the energy developer has to work with the community and hear about their concerns and address reasonable concerns. And that's the basic framework. Another big part of the framework is site suitability. So you all, Synapse did that great mapping project, the technical potential of solar. This is the next iteration of that.
Great.
This takes what you all did and makes it a dynamic map. So if you were to draw a polygon on that map or look at a particular property parcel, you could see the scoring for biodiversity, for forest carbon, for resilience, and for social and environmental burdens. And that score is broken down into quintiles, to use a fancy word, 20% iterations. And what we're trying to do is avoid the impacts in that top 20%.
Okay.
And then if the developer is going to go in the lower quintiles, the remaining 80%, then they have to follow a process. And it's called the mitigation hierarchy. Just a fancy word for a sequential way of first avoiding what you can't avoid, then you minimize. What you can't minimize, then you mitigate. And the law says that agencies, if they go to that mitigation phase, can charge the developer a fee to replace the value of nature. So that might mean the developer acquiring another piece of property that has equal ecological value. So it's a really interesting system. And I think one of the things that's going to be challenging is this going to the local scale. There are a lot of communities that are really small, and they might not have professional staff. They might have volunteers who are low capacity, low expertise, low knowledge in this area. So the state set up a whole new division in its energy office, the Division of Siting and Permitting. There are regional coordinators broken up into 4 regions of the state. And the law also calls for interveners, but that's when things get a little hot and heavy. I want to see what we haven't done yet is having third-party reviewers that can be experts that the developer would pay for, that would be beholden to the community, that could help the community interpret all of the impacts and then how they respond with that mitigation hierarchy. And that's what I'd love to see.
Yeah, when you described the process, I was thinking like, who's the the judge or the regulator or the individual or sitting at the making sure that moves forward in a reasonable way and all that. And who would that be in this model? I'm still not quite clear. It's something about the community.
Yeah. So
they need resources.
So all the boards in the community would have to get together. So planning board, zoning, if they have a natural resources board, conservation commission, and they would have to collaborate on that one unified permit. Mm-hmm. And the law doesn't specify who the decision maker is in the community. So that will be, I think, fleshed out in further iterations as to who that decision maker is.
So what you described is mostly the law, but then there's the implementing the
regulations and the guidance. So the guidance, as you probably know, it's like the bridge between the regulations and the regulator and the regulated community. And that's where the devil in the details exists right now. And there's guidance for several different topics. The one that I'm most concerned about are on site suitability and the mitigation hierarchy. And that's where the scoring comes in on each of those criteria. And that's where the response comes in. And that's the tough part, because the regulations use this phrase. They say there has to be a rational nexus between the actions responding to the impacts. And how do you determine what the responses will be? If you look at something like the Mass Endangered Species Act, they have a ratio of land protection that a developer has to pursue and acquire or put a permanent conservation restriction on land. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this rolls out. The guidance on mitigation is not final yet. Comments were due about 2 weeks ago. And, we really weighed in heavily and said, look, we know communities need help. We already have an entity at UMass, the Clean Energy Extension, but they focus primarily on Western Mass. We'd love to see an Eastern Mass branch of that to help communities, because this is where the rub comes in. We don't want to see this system get clogged. We want to see things. The whole idea is to have things move more efficiently and more equitably, and to have the sort of a predetermination through site suitability of what the impacts are, and then the response is up to the community, weaving together the science and the community experience.
Okay. It sounds like the mitigation piece is the hardest piece, but you also mentioned avoid and minimize. So is there a public process for avoid and minimize, or can you talk a little bit about those standards?
Sure. That's a really good question. So the law and the agencies have said communities have the right to say no, but that needs to be spelled out more clearly how that happens. So when I talked about the criteria, the biodiversity, the forest carbon, the resilience, et cetera, there was that top 20% across the board. It would be ideal if that top 20% could be the avoid. It's very hard to say off limits when you're talking about people's private property. The one way the state is complementing that approach is through the SMART program, the Solar Massachusetts Renewable Target Program. They have the same quintiles, and they say no incentives for the top 20% of forest carbon, and they say no incentives for the highest degrees of biodiversity. And solar developers have told us, hey, we can't develop without the SMART incentives, and we need the adders that SMART provides for the built environment. And it was interesting, in parallel to the commission process, Mark Sylvia, former DOER commissioner, and I said, hey, why don't we have a side dialogue with the solar developers and the conservation community? And we peeled away the layers of the onion to each other's worlds. And they learned more about the science, and we learned more about the solar sector. And we actually did scenarios. We did like a charrette of like, hey, what if we sited here? What would this look like? And it was just such a rewarding experience for all of us, and to peer into each other's worlds. And as part of that, we got clarity on the mitigation hierarchy and the values we wanted to protect. And one of the concrete proposals that came out of that is in SMART. It used to be a subtractor was applied over the 20-year of the renewable energy credit, we said to the solar developers, hey, what do you guys think if we did that payment up front? Because that would be more consistent and predictable for us. And we said, that's even better for us, because if we're going to use that mitigation payment to acquire conservation land, it's better to have a big chunk of dough up front. And what's the best time to preserve a forest for forest carbon? 20 years ago. So we'd have more forest carbon being, or more carbon being absorbed with the forests if we had the money up front.
That's awesome.
So you're finding kind of opportunities for the different stakeholders or to benefit or to find things that will work and get solar sited somewhere.
Absolutely.
In the better locations, and even in those locations to have it be improved.
Absolutely. And I think with the improved part, that's the challenging part, because an older forest is better than removing a forest and planting new trees, as Bill Mumau said in your episode. So that's where the tougher decisions are going to come. Let's think of a scenario of maybe a 50-acre plot of land, and the solar developer says, "Hey, I want to develop."
Wait, and what's there now?
Let's. That's a really good question. Let's say it's sort of a mixture. Some of the pixels that what's great. This map goes down to like 30 by 30 yards of a pixel. Some of the pixels may say, hey, there's high biodiversity here, there's not here. There's high forest carbon here, there's not here. Okay. So what we would like to do with the avoid portion is work with the solar developer and say, where would you position your array to best avoid? And then for the minimized part, it might be, oh, well, gee, it looks like the water flows over this area. What do we do to prevent the exacerbation of flooding to the adjoining property? Because you don't want to have someone's basement get flooded because they have a solar array next door. And then what do we do for the biodiversity? A lot of solar arrays have fences around them. And for the smaller critters, if you have larger holes in the fence, they can go through. And then if you plant native vegetation that attracts the native species, that's better too. But converting a forest is not ideal. So that's where we look at the gradations and say, gee, we'd rather you convert these 10 acres than those 10 acres of forest because of the value they provide. And when we think of the forest, it's the ecological functions that are happening in that forest and adjacent to that forest. So it's clean water, clean air, habitat. So it's a wide range of things.
So have any projects been through this process yet?
No, they have not. But it was interesting. Department of Energy Resources convened a charrette where we walked through a potential development, and there were some good lessons learned out of that. So I think what's interesting is the SMART program is going to have a reset every year. So I think there's plans for adaptive management here.
So ongoing learning and adjustments and
absolutely
in the process and
yeah, and right now I think there are still folks in communities who are concerned. They're attending webinars, they're attending information sessions, and a lot of questions are coming out of those. When the SMART program first rolled out, there were about 7,000 acres of forest converted, and that really smarted for people who care about natural resources. So we're still working to build some trust and show that nature has been better integrated into the process at this point. So we can hopefully avoid those 7,000 acres of conversion.
But it sounds like bringing this kind of thoughtfulness and cooperation and communication to this process is really promising.
I'm hoping so. I mean, and why limit this to just renewable energy? Why not think about, commercial development, industrial development, and housing? You don't want to put, if we're going to, the governor has goals for building 200,000 more places where people can live. Why would we want to put those in an area that would flood? So, we need to think about this because, the Commonwealth is going to continue to grow. And if we have a complementary approach, it leads to smoother community approval and faster community approval. We want renewable energy to come quickly. We want it to be affordable, and it means less arguing in court cases and disputes, which will be more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so much of citing is, just like no or yes. So, over our dead bodies. Okay, over your, so there's like a standoff and the idea of working together.
It's like that Roger Fisher book, Getting to Yes. You think about where do you have the common ground first? Knock off the easy stuff first. Like, hey, we're going to avoid this biodiversity area. We're going to avoid this forest carbon area. Oh, that makes this a whole lot easier to work with from the community's frame and people who care about that stuff.
So you mentioned stakeholders and community groups. How do you find them? How do you reach people and engage them? Because that clearly it has
Super good question.
Yeah.
So another piece of this is about cumulative impact analysis, and it's about thinking about environmental and social burdens. So there are very specific requirements that the developer has to do regarding outreach and stakeholdering and having diverse voices come to the table. When the agencies convened the regulatory hearings, I can't recall how many languages they were interpreted into. I think it was anywhere between 7 and 10 languages. And it was always so fun the first 5 minutes of the meeting, you'd hear all the different languages chime in, giving people the instructions about how to use Teams or Zoom. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. That's a whole nother part of the process that I didn't even address, the environmental and social burdens. The kids' book, Stone Soup? Mm-hmm. So there's the pot in the middle of the town. Everyone's starving. A stranger comes and sets the fire, gets the pot boiling, and puts a stone in the pot and says, oh, and some people say, what are you doing? He said, I'm making stone soup. And someone said, well, and the village was starving at this point. No one was sharing anything. He said, oh, well, we need to put in some carrots. We need to put in onions. We need to put in this or that. So when you think of cumulative impact analysis, most permitting just looks at that one component of the soup that's coming in, but cumulative impact looks at the whole soup. Like if how are facilities that are next to each other going to exacerbate their impacts on a community. So that's one part of it. Another part is looking at the burdens those communities have carried over time with different types of infrastructure. Has there been truck traffic? Has there been pollution? Have there been other things that have impacted people's quality of life and health? So, really thinking thoughtfully about that. And then I talked about the mitigation payment. There's a separate track on community benefits agreements where the developer can work with the community and figure out, gee, we're going to convert this area. Maybe we can put a park next door, or we're going to have a lot of truck traffic. Maybe we put air monitors in the community or reduce the traffic. So there are these two tracks that we need to think about. It's about nature and it's about people.
You mentioned a map or a tool that was part of this. Is that something people can just click on and play
Absolutely.
with?
It's on the website.
How would they do that?
Well, you go to the website of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And the mapper, you go to the renewable energy siting and permitting page, and the mapper is right there. And you can literally go to that mapper and draw a polygon or look at an existing parcel and automatically get the scores.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So
even before a developer buys land, they can think about
absolutely
what they're going to run into.
And developers already have a lot of these mapping tools themselves. They can look at parcels and say, here's the areas that are already built up. Here are the areas that are not. Here are willing landowners that want to collaborate with us. Here's where we can connect to the grid. Mm-hmm. The interconnection is a huge issue.
So you have the electric infrastructure in the map?
I'm trying to remember if we do or not.
Sometimes it's tough.
Yeah, and sometimes it's proposed too. Mm-hmm. So that's another challenge we need to solve, which hasn't been solved yet, is the infrastructure is in places and there's capacity for it without having gone through the siting and permitting, the site suitability process. So that is there's going to be a short blip between now and the end of the investment tax credit in this summer, where there's going to be a lot of development around those interconnection places. And some of those are near the biodiverse and forest carbon-rich areas. So that's a
I
challenge.
see, and they're under a clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for the developer to get the ITC, the investment tax credit. And so that right now, I think the Department of Public Utilities needs to better incorporate the site suitability into their process for citing interconnection, because that is the tail that wags the dog.
For sure. So I imagine there's a lot of opposition from community groups and different people who have, different uses or ideas about the land. Are there people who are interested in the benefits that solar can bring, whether that be tax benefits or lower? I don't know if these are community solar projects that could have lower rates, or are there people using this map to say, bring your solar here?
I think the map is so new that people aren't aware of it yet.
Okay.
So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it today.
Yeah, of course.
And I do think there are people who are trying to thread that needle and walk that line in between. It's always so hard, that tension between the avenues where people have different interests. So it's so important to start off with the small areas in which people agree, so they can see that each party doesn't have three heads and they can move forward.
Cool.
What about thinking bigger in terms of the rest of the country, or kind of other stuff? I mean, this is a problem, issue everywhere.
Yeah.
And so let's solve it for Massachusetts, or let's have a great process and be a role model. And but how replicable is it? And who's thinking about the other states?
The Nature Conservancy is definitely thinking about the other states. We have people who do what I do in all 50 states and in 83 countries.
Right.
We're the biggest conservation organization in the world, and replication is our middle name. We love taking successful models and seeing if they fit in other places. It's not going to be a fit for everybody, but maybe they can adopt components of it.
That's great. So the solar siting study that Synapse did for the Commonwealth.
Yes.
I understand that you had a role supporting that, informing that. Is that work undergirding the work that you do now, or is it in?
I'd say the new mapper is the next iteration.
Okay.
So the technical potential of solar study that you all did in the map got people to think differently. It said, oh, well, maybe we can thread that needle. Maybe we can find the places. So it was super helpful in terms of laying the groundwork. But we moved on and said, we need a scoring mechanism built into this.
And now we know that we can thread that needle, but will we?
Yeah.
That's always the question, isn't it?
Right.
Well, and that's why we need the support for the communities. This isn't a new idea. With licensed site professionals and hazardous waste site cleanups, we have that. TNC worked with the state. We developed the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, which helps communities plan for climate change impacts. TNC had the module that the state adopted, and TNC trained 700 service providers to work with communities. So I'm not saying we're in a position to do that for siting and permitting, but I think it would be great if there was some way that we had third-party helpers for the communities.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Steve, great for being on the show.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Great to have you
Really
here.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
Nice to
thank
meet you
so
both finally.
much. Yeah, nice to meet you. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.